Welcome to our special edition of BizTalk, where we explore the global economic implications of an upcoming second term for U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. With a significant political and economic shift on the horizon, we'll delve into how his policies might evolve, their broader impact on world economy, and how global markets should prepare for what's to come. Join us today to discuss these critical issues are four distinguished guests from around the globe. Mr. Joël Ruet, founder and chairman of the Bridge Tank based in Paris. Welcome. And Warwick Powell, professor at Queensland University of Technology and senior fellow at Taihe Institute. And Mr. Xing Yuqing, professor of economics at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies in Tokyo. Welcome. And Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. Well, thank you all for being here today. Let's start from trade. President-elect Trump's first term saw a dramatic shift in U.S. trade policy with tariffs and trade wars. Now it seems he's going to double down on this stance, having threatened to increase tariffs to 60% on imports from China and 10% to 20% on imports from other trading partners. So, Mr. Ruet, let me start with you. Europe has felt the impact of these policies and could face higher tariffs. How do you expect his trade policies to evolve and affect global trade dynamics?
Well, very simple. Between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0, the concept of supply chain has completely changed, and hence the tariffs issue. Those days, when he first came to power, the supply chain was something like very, theoretical, or that economists, specialized economists would look at to optimize. But in terms of policy making, it was very vague. Nowadays, after the COVID, after the first series of, I would say, tariff shocks, after the awareness that resources are precious, everyone is focused on the supply chain. And the supply chains have changed a lot. So they've become weapons, they've become objects of competition, and tariffs will be there and rampant. So that's a new thing. If you want, these policies are much more accepted by policymakers. Two, this time we'll have no surprise. The Trump 1.0 administration took a bit of time to test their own tools. Now they're pretty much convinced about their tools. Last point, if you compare the effect of tariffs on Europe and on China, I think China knows pretty much what to expect from the Trump zero administration. For Europe, it's a bit more unclear, and being unclear is not a good news. The tariffs might be lesser on Europe, but the uncertainty is bigger, and markets don't like uncertainty.
Right. And Professor Powell, turning to you now, taking a broader view, how do you see Trump's second term trade policies reshaping global trade? And specifically, how might these policies disrupt global supply chains, which are already under pressure from geopolitical tensions and economic uncertainties?
Look, I think we've got to remember, firstly, that 2025 is not the same as 2016. The contours of global economic exchange have transformed a lot over the course of the last 9 years, and in fact have transformed a lot from the days when the United States was the dominant manufacturing power in the world. So we are now entering into a period where Trump is likely to extend the application of tariffs in the hopes that it will lead to a reindustrialization of America. This is a nostalgic turn in the vain hope that somehow the mere adjustment of relative prices is going to lead to a rejuvenation of a sector that has actually been hollowing out for over 50 years. This won't happen. The second point to remember is that the United States, as a trading country, is no longer as significant a player on the global stage as it once was. This does not deliver the kind of leverage that the United States once did have on the promise of enabling greater market access to its market for others. That's where we're at.
So building on that, given the shifts in global trade dynamics, Professor Xing, I want to have your take on Trump's trade policy toward China. How would that evolve, and what would be the implications for Chinese exports, supply chains, and how should China react?
China has been the center of a global manufacturing value chain. Trump repeatedly said in his second term, he would like to impose 60% tariff on China, 10% on the imports of the rest of the world. So if Trump does implement all his tariff as he promised, that will mean escalation of the current China-US trade war. Mm-hmm. Well, I think trade benefit both China and the United States. If the United States is not happy with trade condition, the U.S. government should negotiate with the Chinese government, like what President Trump did in his first term, rather than impose additional tariff. I don't think trade war can solve any dispute. If U.S. impose additional tariff and the second term of President Trump, I think China will and should respond tit for tat to the Trump's new tariff. Why? Because the trade is a reciprocal. So if the U.S. closes market to Chinese goods, there is no reasons that China will continue to open its market to the United States. Well, China imported about 147 billion goods from the United States in 2023, and many American multinational companies, they sold a substantial amount of goods in China. This actually is another way American multinational companies export to Chinese market. If we just think about so-called export, that is make goods at home, then export to the foreign countries, that is very narrow thinking. Many American multinational companies, they produce in China, they sell in China, like Apple, Tesla. So this is also kind of new type of trade in the age of a global value chain. Even we can now see that from the statistic. So basically means U.S. benefit a lot from its economic relation with China. So I hope the two countries can negotiate and reach a compromise, show their difference, rather than going into another trade war.
Well, that would be the best scenario. And Professor Liu, I would like to have your take on this. Is still possible for the two sides to negotiate a way out, or we're going to definitely see an escalation of trade tensions and bear all those consequences because trade war is very costly?
Well, tariff is nothing more than a type of additional cost on doing business. And we have to be aware of the simple fact that it is the U.S. companies who are going to pay for such additional cost, and eventually it's going to be shared along the entire supply chain. Much of the burden will go to the American households. So this is really a simple truth. And the fact that since 2013, there has been trade war between China and the United States, and the Biden administration inherited such a sort of legacy. But in 2021, we noticed quite a spike in the China-US trade by 14.5%. So there has been ups and downs, which means the tariff is not really serving the avowed purpose by either the Trump administration or Biden administration in reducing the trade imbalance, in bringing back American jobs, and to entrench security. Eventually, it is really the U.S. constituencies that's going to pay the bill. But having said that, this is really a very cheap but effective trick as a politician, because tariff will go to the federal coffer, and eventually, he can really buy some of the favor, giving some subsidies and some of the, the small gifts to the constituencies. But, people with very basic rational calculation will see the cheapness behind this trick.
Here on BizTalk, we connect the dots, shedding light on the real stories behind the economic landscape. To better understand China's dynamism and the economies and rhythms of business, propelling new drivers of growth.
China.
BizTalk, your window into China and the global economy. Only on BizTalk.
And now let's turn to multilateralism, a cornerstone of global cooperation that has faced significant challenges during President-elect Trump's first term. We saw the U.S. withdrawn from international agreements and expressed skepticism toward global institutions like the UN and the WTO. Mr. Ruet, will we see further disengagement from multilateral organizations, and what could that mean for global economic cooperation?
Well, thank you for your question. Two issues matter really in terms of multilateral cooperations out of many that we could think of. One is climate, and the second one is, again, trade, and I'll get back to trade. On climate, not much to say. If you look at what happened under the first presidency of Donald Trump, well, the US exited the Paris Agreement. And what happened? Well, the states, the cities, the municipalities, the corporations invested into fighting against climate change because they felt that it's part of their modernization process, that's part of keeping competitive advantages. So one can say more or less, and experts have worked on that what was achieved under a US administration out of the Paris Agreement was more or less the same of what would have been achieved with a Trump administration within the Paris Agreement. When the Biden administration came back to the Paris Agreement, they even further had to abide by what had been decided without the United States. So possibly the Trump administration might even want to remain within the agreement, as it's easier to derail it while being inside than being outside, So history won't repeat. Back to trade still, please allow me. I absolutely agree with what Professor Liu was saying, the world economy, and Professor Powell and Xing, that the economy has changed a lot. Ideas have changed a lot also. One idea has changed in Washington. The idea that has changed is that nations don't compete, only companies compete. Let's not be lured by the short-term additional costs of tariffs and etc., which can be anyway waived off by subsidies, pleasing the constituencies, and Professor Liu is very right on that. Let's be absolutely consistent with the idea that what matters is the next technology. And for the next technology, the US want to reindustrialize, I don't know, it's a nice catchword for the electorate, but they want to reinvest in their own technologies. Be it the Biden way through an act with a lot of subsidies, be it the Trump way with tariffs patched and matched with subsidies, but they're looking at the technology of the future, and they're pretty aware that China has achieved the 2025 objectives. They're pretty aware that the EU has had this Green Deal, which is now turning into a Green Industrial Deal, and which could be a competitive advantage to Europe and to the EU. So we're really thinking in terms of making the comparative advantage of the future, And this is where, back to the question on multilateralism, the WTO has a future if it is able not to think about the competitive advantages of today, but of the competitive advantages of tomorrow in a more dynamic way. And Mrs. Ngozi is pretty clear about that. So there is a future for multilateralism.
And Mr. Power, turning to you, if the U.S. takes a backseat in global governance, what could that mean for the frameworks and systems that underpin the world economy today?
Well, the simple answer is that the rest of the world will continue to move on. The world won't sit around and wait for the United States and wait for Washington to figure out what it wants to do. The world today is sufficiently mature, is sufficiently capable in terms of technologies, human resource know-hows, and financial wherewithal to move forward to address the issues as the rest of the world sees as appropriate. So the green transition, for instance, will proceed on the basis of whoever is willing to participate. We know that there are countries across the global south who see this not only as a climate change challenge, but as a development opportunity. It's an opportunity to leapfrog the traditional technologies that have hamstrung their ability to develop and to achieve an outcome which empowers them through energy sovereignty to build their own futures in a clean, green, and sustainable way. If the US doesn't play, then the rest of the world can resource the green transition through the technologies and know-how that exist elsewhere. Put simply, if the United States does not want to participate in multilateral institutions, unfortunately for them, the rest of the world won't wait. Now, this comes back to the question of the trade situation too. And just as the other speakers have noted, if the WTO is incapable of addressing the trade challenges going forward, either because the appellate body has been stymied, because the United States won't ratify the appointment of new judges, well, trading countries will develop workarounds and new institutions. They will build new multilateral platforms at a regional level that will facilitate an expansion of regional trade and capital flows to enable economic development to proceed. So again, if the United States wants to backtrack, there's nothing that others can do to stop them from doing so. But let's not be concerned that somehow a backtracking America can put a halt to important global collaborations that can proceed regardless.
Indeed, openness and collaboration is key to stay ahead in this new round of technological innovation. And Professor Xing, let me turn to you from Asia's perspective. What does it mean for the future of multilateralism and regional cooperation?
We may have a strong regional result to the involvement of America. Let's recall what happened on the day one during the first term of President Trump. He quitted TPP. But after that, under the strong leadership of former Prime Minister Abe, the CPTPP finally was achieved. So CPTPP, I think, will be strengthened under the unilateralist threat of the United States. Trump wants to make America great again. But the way he tried to achieve that objective is to have so-called American first. Basically means he has no sense of multilateralism. WTO is a result of multilateralism. Actually, US was a founding member of the WTO, and the American leadership after World War II, the general agreement on tariff and trade was achieved. But now, if you recall what Trump, claimed during his campaign and what he promised to do on his day one, that is impose 10% tariff on Chinese goods, 25% on Mexican goods, and 25% on Canada. So basically means Trump think America is the largest economy. It had all the leverage to set the term for all his trading partner. So he wants to be alone or make America alone. He even, disregards the relationship with American ally. So look at what happened, for the Nippon's acquisition of U.S. Steel. This is another example that is unilateralism rather than multilateralism. Under the Biden administration, the United States tried to remedy the damaged relation with its ally. And the Biden administration tried to restructure global supply chain through so-called friendshoring. or building this secured supply chain with partner and the country which share the common value. But and the new Trump administration, I don't think that will be the way he will go.
.360-degree profiles of industry movers and shakers, tech mavericks, and policymakers. We drill down on their success. We ask how they set strategy and how they navigate in an increasingly competitive market. Real talk, real business. Join the conversation. BizTalk, only on CGTN.
Professor Liu, turning to you, in contrast to the U.S., China has been advocating globalization and a shared future for humanity. How do you see these two divergent approaches affecting global trade dynamics and the global economic influence?
Now, for the United States should be given great credibility since the Bretton Agreement by saving the world from chaos, from the jungle law in trade and investment deals. And right now, since the Trump administration, in his first term, he just thought, well, the buying stuff from the rest of the world is really a benevolence. It's you buy a T-shirt, simply you are doing charity work for the seller. You do not really care whether you really need it or not. So this is approach of American exceptionalism does really damage the leadership of the United States. So now we are noticing that the regional agreements are really compensating the deficiency of WTO as a multilateral trading forum, and now China is also playing a leadership and more responsible role, particularly in the global south and also with its neighbors. One reason for the entire Asia to remain peace and prosperous for so many years is also because China, as a big giant, is really endorsing and also contributing to the notion of a shared prosperity, and by being more reciprocal, by taking more responsibilities, even though China is still a developing country. Look at the number of aids that we gave to the global south, and look at the number of infrastructure projects China has really conducted along the Belt and Road countries, etc. So therefore, if you look at the long term of the historical development, leadership may change. And the change of such leadership is that whether people are voting with money or voting with more of the praise for your own performance, and the final management is that what type of benefit you can bring to those people who really want to support you. So this is the approach that China brought through lessons and also through success experiences. And this is where China wanted to be resolved to move forward.
Great points. And let's shift our focus to the tech sector, one of the most strategic economic issue globally. The U.S. has faced increasing competition from China and Europe in the tech sector, as Mr. Duet earlier mentioned. So, Mr. Duet, how might Trump's economic policies address this competition in his second term? And could this lead to further fragmentation of the global tech sector?
Once we know that, the problem with the technologies of the future is that they require a lot of investment. So the capital markets are needed, but they require also large markets to be tested. So from technologies to technologies, these large markets to test the technologies are either enough in the US market, enough in the EU market, or for some technologies, you need the Chinese market as well, you know? So technology will become the bone of contention, but also the source of negotiations. And I really believe that the fiercest competition, the fiercest wars will be on technology. But at the same time, the best agreements will be on technology. Some technologies will require markets which are global, and there the US and the EU will be forced to have an agreement with China.
Professor Powell, from your perspective, how would this competition play out? Do you think the Trump administration will continue to curb China's technology and innovation in like semiconductor sectors? And will that create more risks or opportunities for major tech powers?
There's no doubt in my mind that the Trump administration will continue the general trajectory that was initiated by the Biden administration insofar as efforts were made to contain China's access to and ability to develop the newest technologies in the marketplace. So I think everybody's accustomed to that new operating environment. Over the last few years, as the United States built higher walls and made the yards increasingly larger, Chinese enterprises and government have successfully weathered the storm. A new ecosystem with domestic capabilities has emerged, largely capable now of achieving technology standards that only 3 years ago, analysts and others around the world thought would have been impossible. What this is doing is fundamentally changing the landscape in which the global technology scene will unfold over the next 10 to 20 years. For the past 30 years, American big tech has largely been a proxy for global tech. What has been American big technology has, in effect, been the technology of the world. And that has enabled United States companies to generate above average profits and garner rents. And it's also allowed the American surveillance state to, over time, weaponize its access and control of critical software and hardware. And we now have global technologies that enable countries to bypass the mechanisms by which the traditional dominant powers of the world have been able to control the flow of funds around the world. So where are we heading technology-wise? What we're seeing is the emergence of what I've called elsewhere a form of digital Westphalia. This means a greater emphasis on national digital sovereignty, together with the technologies that enable robust but secure interoperability. This is the big change that's happening, and it's a challenge to the dominant position of American big tech that it has not faced for 30 years.
Great insights. Well, many thanks again to our esteemed guests for sharing their expertise and perspectives on how a second Trump term could reshape the global economic landscape. As the world watches closely, the decisions made in Washington will have far-reaching implications for trade, investment, and multilateral cooperation. It is a critical moment for policymakers, investors, and nations to chart a course that ensures stability and shared prosperity. And that's all for this edition of BizTalk on CGTN. Thank you for being with us. Until next time, bye for now.